The frost that had glittered so prettily on the lawns of Meadowbank House in the morning had, by midnight, turned to a hard, glassy shroud. Inside the great library, however, the atmosphere was stifling. It was a room of deep leather looming bookcases, and the faint, sweet smell of pipe tobacco that had long since seeped into the very grain of the wood. At its heart, casting a grotesque shadow in the flickering light of a single desk lamp, lay the body of Alistair Finch. Finch, secretary and confidant to the elderly philanthropist Sir Robert Van Allen, was not a man who drew the eye in life. In death, he commanded a terrible silent audience. He was slumped forward onto the vast mahogany desk, his thinning hair matted with a dark, viscous substance. Near his outstretched right hand lay a heavy crystal paperweight, its sharp corner stained. To the untrained eye, it was a brutal, simple crime of passion. But the true focus of the room, the object that seemed to draw every anxious glance, was not the corpse. It was the gaping void where the ebony cabinet had stood for over a century. Sir Robert, his face the color of old parchment, leaned heavily on the mantelpiece. "The Judas miseries," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They're gone. All of them. The Judas miseries, not a single gem, but a set of 12 flawless, uncut black diamonds, each the size of a thumbnail. Legend held they were cursed, brought from the East by a disgraced crusader. To Sir Robert, they were not cursed treasure but a legacy, the centerpiece of his collection, kept secure behind the exquisitely carved doors of the 17th century ebony cabinet. The cabinet itself, a masterpiece of inlaid ivory and dark wood, was gone, seemingly evaporated from the room. Standing in a tense semicircle were the others who had been in the house that fateful evening. There was Lydia Van Allen, Sir Robert's much younger wife. Draped in emerald silk, she was a study in controlled distress, her handkerchief pressed to lips that were, perhaps, a shade too perfectly bowed for genuine grief. Her eyes, however, were dry and watchful. Beside her stood Dr. Benedict Croft, the family physician and Sir Robert's oldest friend. A man of quiet, solid build, and a reassuring manner, he currently looked anything but reassuring. He kept adjusting his spectacles, his gaze flitting from the body to the empty space on the Persian rug. In the shadows by the curtain stood Neville Stanton, Sir Robert's nephew and heir presumptive. Tall, with the careless good looks of youth and a perpetually discontented curl to his lip, he surveyed the scene with an expression that hovered between shock and a kind of grim fascination. And finally, there was Miss Elara Vance, the librarian Sir Robert had hired 6 months prior to catalogue his extensive collection. Pale and severe in a grey dress, her hands were clasped so tightly the knuckles shone white. Her eyes were fixed on Finch with a look of profound, personal horror that seemed to exceed that of the family. Inspector Harold Barlow of the local constabulary, a man built like a bulldog and with a temperament to match, cleared his throat. "Right. The door was locked from the inside, windows secured. We found the key to the library door, in Mr. Finch's own waistcoat pocket." He let the implication hang. "The only other way in or out is through the French windows there, but the catch is old, stiff. It makes a devil of a noise. Mrs. Trumbull, the housekeeper, was in the hall until 11 and heard nothing." "So," said Neville Stanton, his voice cutting through the thick air, "Finch let the thief in," they argued. "The thief brained him with the paperweight, took the cabinet and then—" "What? Phantomed through the walls?" "The cabinet," Miss Vance whispered, her voice surprisingly firm. "It is immense. It would take 2 strong men to move it with any speed, and yet no one saw or heard a thing." "Precisely, mademoiselle," said a new voice from the doorway. All heads turned. He stood there, a figure of impeccable neatness in the chaotic gloom. His head was egg-shaped, his moustache a thing of magnificent symmetrical perfection. He wore a heavy overcoat, and despite the lateness of the hour, not a single speck of mud dared adorn his patent leather shoes. He took in the scene, the body, the empty space, the cluster of faces, with a single, sweeping glance that seemed to inventory every detail, from the tilt of the paperweight to the stray thread on Lydia Van Allen's hem. "I am Hercule Poirot," he announced. "I was summoned by Sir Robert on a matter of a most delicate nature some days ago. It would seem, lass, that I am arrived just in time, but for the tragedy, not to prevent it." Inspector Barlow's face flushed. "Poirot? The Belgian?" "Sir Robert, you never said." "I consulted Monsieur Poirot privately," Sir Robert interrupted, his voice weary, "regarding certain tensions within the household. I feared something was amiss. I did not fear this." He gestured helplessly at the desk. Poirot stepped into the library with a delicate tread, as if avoiding not physical obstacles, but impurities in the narrative. He did not go immediately to the body. Instead, his eyes traveled to the space where the cabinet had been, then to the bookshelves flanking it, then to the pattern of the rug. "A locked room," Poirot murmured. "A missing cabinet of great size and greater value. A dead man with the key. It is, on the surface, a puzzle most bizarre." His eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "But the surface, it is for the fish to skim. Hercule Poirot, he dives for the depths." He finally approached Alistair Finch. He did not touch the body, but he studied it with the intensity of a connoisseur examining a masterpiece. He noted the angle of the wound, the position of the arms, the slight disarray of the papers under the left elbow. "The paper weight," Poirot said. "It is from the desk set." "Non?" "Yes," croaked Sir Robert. "A gift from the city. Finch always used it." Poirot's gaze shifted to the desk. The blotter was neatly centered. A pen lay parallel to its edge. A small clock showed the time, stopped at 10:08. To the left of where Finch had fallen was a single sheet of paper, blank but for a single line of writing, the ink smudged by the impact of his head. Regarding the disposition of the... "The disposition of the what, I wonder?" Poirot mused aloud. He then looked at the floor, his brow furrowing. He moved to the French windows, examined the catch without touching it, and gave a small, satisfied nod. He turned, his eyes passing over each suspect, lingering for a fraction of a second longer on each face. "Inspector Barlow, you will of course make your examination," Poirot said with a courteous incline of his head. "But I would ask, as a great favor, that nothing in this room is disturbed more than is absolutely necessary. The truth, it lies not only in what is here, but in how it is arranged. The order, the psychology, it is everything." He turned to the assembled group, his manner suddenly brisk. "And now, if you please, we will adjourn. This room is a tomb, and the air it is thick with more than sorrow. It is thick with lies. Do not look so shocked. It is natural, in the face of death, to hold something back. But Hercule Poirot, he must know all. Tomorrow we will begin." His final glance was not at the body, nor the empty space, but at the small, stopped clock on the desk, a tiny, orderly detail in a scene of profound disorder. A smile, thin and without warmth, touched his lips. The game, it had begun. And the first move, he saw already, had been a mistake. For in a room where a giant cabinet had vanished, it was the smallest things that would speak the loudest. The morning brought no clarity, only a crisp, unforgiving sunlight that exposed every dust mote dancing in the library's stale air. The body was gone, removed by the sombre men from the coroner's office, but the ominous stain on the blotter remained. A dark Rorschach test at which each suspect glanced, and then quickly looked away. Poirot had taken breakfast, a single piece of dry toast and a cup of chocolate so dark it was nearly black, in his room. He did not believe in mingling with suspects before the formalities. It created a false camaraderie. Now, seated in the morning room, a space of chintz and watered silk, he prepared to survey his battlefield. Inspector Barlow, notebook in hand, hovered with an air of reluctant partnership. "We'll need statements from everyone, Mr. Poirot," Barlow said. "Standard procedure. But of course, mon cher inspector," Poirot replied, arranging a set of sharpened pencils before him with geometric precision. "The procedure, it is the skeleton. I am interested in the flesh that hangs upon it. The nerves, the pulses. Let us begin with the inhabitants of this unhappy house." They came in one by one, each bringing their own climate into the sunlit room. First was Sir Robert, moving with the stiffness of a man whose world has crumbled overnight. He confirmed the facts, the ebony cabinet's immense value, both historic and intrinsic, the security of the library, of which only he and Finch held keys, the household's movements. His motive, as presented by his own grief, was non-existent. Yet Poirot's eyes noted the tremor in the old man's hand, not from sorrow alone, but from a deep, abiding fear. "You consulted me, Sir Robert, regarding tensions. Of what nature, precisely?" Sir Robert's eyes darted towards the door. "It is delicate. Family matters, financial pressures. Neville, my nephew, is impatient for his inheritance. My wife finds the constraints of an old man's company dull. Finch had been acting strangely, secretive. I feared someone was influencing him, perhaps blackmailing him. And the Judas miseries? Were they to be sold? Never." The old man's voice cracked with passion. "They are my life's pride. But there had been an offer, a substantial one, from a private collector in Paris. Finch was handling the correspondence. I was vehemently opposed." Poirot stored this nugget away. A secretary acting against his patron's wishes? Intriguing. Next entered Lydia Van Allen. She had exchanged the emerald silk for dove gray, the color of half-mourning. Her composure was flawless, a veneer of cultured distress. "My husband is a dear, but preoccupied with his treasures," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "One can feel quite alone in a house full of history. Poor Mr. Finch. He was always so. Present, you know, he had a way of knowing things. Almost everything that happened in this house, including things you wished he did not know, madame." Poirot asked gently. Her eyes, the color of slate, met his without flinching. "I have nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot, but a woman values her privacy. Last week, I found him in my private sitting room, examining a letter. He claimed he was looking for a misplaced inventory. It was unsettling. Dr. Croft followed, bringing with him a scent of antiseptic and pipe tobacco. His account was medical and brief. He had been playing chess with Sir Robert in the drawing room until 9:45, then retired to the small study to update patient notes. He heard nothing. The wound? Poirot asked. Consistent with a single violent blow from the paperweight. Death would have been almost instantaneous. Time of death, between 10 and 11, I should say. Consistent with the stopped clock. And the cabinet? Could one man move it, physically? I doubt it. It's monstrously heavy. But I am a doctor, not a furniture mover. He shifted uncomfortably. Alistair Finch was not a well-liked man. He had a talent for leverage. He knew secrets. In a house like this, that is a dangerous vocation. Neville Stanton slouched in, his expression one of bored irritation masking a raw nerve. He had been in his room, he claimed, listening to the wireless. No alibi. He made no attempt to fabricate one. The old boy's obsessed with those damned black diamonds, Neville said, lighting a cigarette without asking permission. Worth a fortune. Enough to clear all the estate's debts and leave plenty over. But would he sell? Not a chance. Sentimental fool. And Finch was the gatekeeper, always whispering, always influencing. A roadblock. And with that roadblock removed? Poirot inquired. Neville's eyes hardened. Look here. If you're suggesting, I suggest nothing. I merely trace the contours of the situation. You inherit if Sir Robert dies, non? But the diamonds are not entailed. He could leave them to anyone. To his wife. To a museum. To his diligent secretary. The young man paled, his nonchalance shattered. Finally, Miss Elara Vance entered, her posture rigid. She confirmed she was in the library until 9:30, organizing auction catalogues. She left when Finch arrived for his nightly review with Sir Robert. Did he seem agitated? Expecting anyone? He was, precise, as always. She clasped her hands. He did remark on the cabinet's lock. He said it had been sticking, and he had oiled it earlier. He was meticulous about its care. And the clock on the desk? Was it keeping good time? She blinked. The clock? I believe so. It was a reliable piece. Why do you ask? Poirot merely smiled and dismissed her. When the door closed, he turned to Inspector Barlow. You see, Inspector, we have a tapestry of motives. Greed, impatience, fear of exposure, the quiet tensions of a stifled household, and at the center, the vanished heart of the matter, a cabinet that cannot vanish. Barlow grunted. The case is plain to me. Finch was in league with the thief, this Paris collector, maybe. They argued over the spoils. The thief killed him, and then somehow, with an accomplice, smuggled the cabinet out. A window left unlatched earlier, perhaps. Portrait, Poirot said, his eyes on the middle distance. But then, why stage the locked room? Why place the key in Finch's pocket? It is a gesture, a statement. It shouts of a meticulous theatrical mind, and it overlooks 1, 2, perhaps 3 small incongruous details that do not fit the shouting. What details? Poirot stood, straightening his already perfectly straight waistcoat. That, Inspector, is what the little grey cells must now arrange into order. First, we must examine the one witness who heard nothing, but who may have seen everything. The house itself. Poirot's examination of the house began, with fastidious precision, in the library. He dismissed the uniformed constable at the door with a polite but firm nod. For a long moment, he simply stood on the threshold, his eyes performing a slow, comprehensive inventory. Observe, Inspector, he said, though Barlow had already observed a dozen times. The scene of the crime is a statement. We must read the punctuation. He moved first to the French windows. He did not touch the catch but knelt, his head tilted. You noted it was stiff, making a devil of a noise. And yet, see here, on the lower rail, the faintest scuff in the dust. Recent. So, it was opened, but not last night. The dust, it has settled back over the mark. This was done earlier in the day, perhaps. He glided to the empty space on the rug where the ebony cabinet had stood. The rich Persian pattern was vivid, save for a rectangular area slightly paler, protected from light and wear. At its edges the pile was deeply depressed. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Such weight. A monument. And yet he traced the edge of the depressed area with a finger. Then his eyes scanned outward. He moved to the bookshelves flanking the space. On one at shoulder height, a line of leather-bound volumes was perfectly aligned. On the other, a similar set was disturbed, a gap where a large gilt-edged tome had been removed and not replaced. The mind that removes a cabinet of such size in a locked room, Poirot murmured, would it be the same mind that carelessly misshelves a book? Or is this a different signature? He turned his attention to the desk. He studied the exact position of the stained blotter, the angle of the overturned inkwell, now righted by the lieu-con, the precise location of the pen. He did not touch the stopped clock. Instead, he opened the desk drawer. It contained the expected paraphernalia: seals, spare nibs, a bottle of ink. All orderly. Too orderly. Finch was a methodical man, Poirot said. His drawer is a symphony of order. But his desktop at the moment of death, was it not a little chaotic? The fallen paperweight, the smudged letter, the overturned ink. For such a man, is that not a note of dissonance? Barlow shifted impatiently. He was attacked, man. You expect him to tidy up while being murdered? I expect the attack it to be consistent with the psychology, Poirot replied calmly. He was now on his hands and knees, examining the floor around the desk. A few inches from the desk's left pedestal, almost hidden in the pattern of the rug. He paused. With a delicate tweezer produced from his waistcoat pocket, he picked up a single slender object. It was a wood shaving, no longer than an inch, pale and fresh. Oak, Poirot announced, holding it to the light. Newly planed. Not from this room. This furniture is mahogany, walnut, rosewood. He placed it carefully in a small envelope. A souvenir, perhaps, of the cabinet's journey? His final stop was the bookshelf with the gap. He peered at the vacant space, then at the titles on either side. A History of European Cabinetry, he read aloud. And Venetian Inlay Techniques. Our missing volume is likely related. A reference work, consulted perhaps not for reading, but for doing. Straightening up, Poirot brushed a microscopic speck of dust from his trouser knee. His expression was one of profound satisfaction, as if the disordered scene had begun to whisper a coherent, if shocking, story. Well, demanded Barlow, does the house tell you who the murderer is? The house tells me that the murder of Alistair Finch and the disappearance of the ebony cabinet are two separate problems, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. One is simple, brutal, personal. The other is complex, theatrical, an illusion. They have been deliberately woven together to confuse. But the threads, Inspector, they are of different colors. And Hercule Poirot, he has begun to separate them. Poirot conducted his interviews not in the morning room, but in the late Alistair Finch's own small, austere office. It was, Poirot felt, psychologically instructive to question people in the domain of the deceased. The atmosphere of rigid order, the sharpened pencils aligned by length, the filing cabinets locked, the bare walls, acted as a silent auditor to every faltering statement. He began with Mrs. Tremble, the housekeeper. A woman of granite demeanor and sharp eyes, she sat with hands folded in her lap, a bunch of keys at her waist. You were in the main hall until 11 o'clock, madam. The library door is visible from there? Clear as day, sir. And I didn't move from my chair, except to fetch my mending basket from the cupboard at 10. That took but a minute. And you saw or heard nothing? No one approaching the library, no sound of disturbance? Not a soul, sir. Dr. Croft went up to the study around 9:45. Miss Vance came out of the library just before 9:30. After that, the only person to pass was Mr. Finch himself, going in at 9:30 on the dot, like he always did for his meeting with Sir Robert. Poirot's moustache twitched. His meeting? But Sir Robert was playing chess with the doctor until nearly 10. Mrs. Tremble's lips pursed. Well, that was the arrangement. Sir Robert's schedule is like clockwork. Perhaps he was delayed. Poirot shifted tack. The ebony cabinet. To move it quietly would be a great labor. Could it have been done earlier in the day, before the room was locked? Impossible, sir. I dusted the library myself after luncheon. It was there then, and the master was in and out all afternoon. Thank you, Mrs. Tremble. Your precision is admirable. Next was Lydia Van Allen. In Finch's functional space, her elegance seemed alien. A hothouse orchid in a stone cellar. Madame, you told us you found Finch in your sitting room. What was the nature of the letter he saw? A faint blush colored her neck. A private correspondence, Monsieur Poirot, from an old friend. Its tone was affectionate. My husband is a dear man, but he is possessive and prone to jealousy. Finch understood that. He implied that discretion had a price. Blackmail, then. I would not dignify it with the term. It was a understanding. A small monthly consideration for my allowance, in exchange for his silence. Her voice hardened, but recently he became greedier. He spoke of substantial one-time settlements. I believe he tried the same game with others, including your husband? Perhaps. Robert has been terribly anxious lately. Poirot produced the small envelope, tipping the wood shaving onto the blotter. Do you recognize this, madam? A fresh oak shaving. She glanced at it with apparent bewilderment. It looks like sawdust? From the workshop in the stables, perhaps? The groom does some carpentry. Poirot nodded, retrieving the sliver. Dr. Croft entered, radiating a professional calm that seemed slightly forced in these surroundings. Doctor, you were Sir Robert's chess opponent. Did he seem preoccupied? Very. He made uncharacteristic errors. He mentioned Finch was pressuring him about the Paris offer. Sir Robert was furious, said Finch had overstepped. And after your game, you went to the study. Did you pass the library? I walked down the corridor. The library door was closed. I heard nothing from within. Not even the sound of a falling paperweight? Or perhaps Poirot leaned forward. The sound of movement? Of a large, heavy object being shifted. Croft's eyes widened behind his spectacles. Good Lord, no. Nothing like that. Had such a sound occurred, I would certainly have heard it. The walls are thick. But a crash or a sustained dragging, no. Miss Elara Vance was pale, but composed. Poirot did not mention the wood shaving. Mademoiselle, you are an expert on furniture. The ebony cabinet. How would one disable its lock? The question startled her. It's a simple, robust 17th century mechanism. To force it would damage the wood terribly. To pick it would require skill. Finch had the key. And to move it? How many men? 2 strong men could lift it, but with great difficulty and noise. It would be far easier and quieter on a wheeled dolly if one could be brought to the French windows without notice. A fact known to all in the household? I should think so. It is common sense. Poirot's final question was casual. The clock on the desk. Did you notice if it was wound? She frowned. Finch wound it every evening as part of his routine. Without fail. It was a fetish. When she left, Poirot sat very still. The pieces began to orbit in his mind. The stopped clock wound faithfully. The impossible, silent removal of a behemoth. The blackmail. The greed. The meeting that did not happen. He summoned Inspector Barlow. Tell me, Inspector, the key found in Finch's pocket, was it the only key to the library? Barlow consulted his notes. According to Sir Robert, yes. He has one. Finch had the other. We found Sir Robert's on his dresser. C'est curieux, Poirot murmured. For a man who so feared tensions in his house, to have only 2 keys to a room holding his greatest treasure. It is an invitation to trouble, is it not? Unless his eyes lit up. Unless there was a 3rd key, one that was not supposed to exist. And that, perhaps, is the key to everything. The discovery, when it came, was made not by Poirot's grey cells, but by the brute force thoroughness of Inspector Barlow's men. A constable, searching the disused stable block on the property's periphery, found it in an empty feed bin, carelessly concealed under a sack. It was a heavy, old-fashioned key. Barlow presented it to Poirot in the library with the triumphant air of a magician producing a rabbit. Sir Robert, summoned, turned it over in his trembling hands. It is a duplicate. A copy of the library key. But how? I never had another made. Finch would not have dared. A clever locksmith could take an impression, Barlow said, jabbing a finger in the air. And we know who had both the need and the opportunity to have one made. He turned to Poirot. Neville Stanton. Up to his ears in debt, impatient for his inheritance. We found IOUs in his room from a London club that would make your eyes water. He could have had this key cut months ago, planning the theft. Last night, he used it. The inspector's theory unfolded with compelling simplicity. Stanton had used the duplicate key to enter the library after Finch arrived. A struggle ensued over the cabinet's contents, the Paris offer perhaps, and Stanton, in a panic, seized the paperweight and struck the fatal blow. Then, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the crime, he had fled, abandoning both the key and his plan to steal the diamonds. He's admitted he has no alibi, Barlow concluded. It fits. It all fits. Poirot had listened in silence, his expression giving nothing away. Now, he took the proffered key. He examined it not for its teeth, but for its surface. He ran a thumb along its length, then held it close to his eyes. It fits, you say? Poirot murmured. Perhaps too well, mon cher inspector. Consider. You are a desperate man. You have just committed a murder for a treasure of incalculable value. You possess a key that is your only link to the crime, a key that no one knows exists. What do you do with it? He panicked, hid it in the stables. None. He would drop it in the lake, or bury it deep, or throw it down a well. To hide it on the property, so near the house, is not panic. It is placement. It is leaving a breadcrumb for the hungry policeman. Poirot sniffed the key. And this key, it has the smell of oil. Fresh oil. Not the grime of a pocket or a feed bin, but a deliberate application. Finch oiled the cabinet lock. Miss Vance offered quietly from the doorway. She had been drawn by the commotion. Exactly, mademoiselle. Finch oiled the cabinet lock. But this is the room key. Why oil it? Unless it was to be handled silently last night, and then left, conspicuously. Poirot turned the key over, and there is no trace of sawdust, no speck of the fresh oak we found. If Mr. Stanton had moved a great cabinet, would not some evidence cling to his key, to his person? Sir Robert's face was ashen. Then you do not believe Neville is guilty? I believe someone wishes us very much to think he is, Poirot said. It is a tableau arranged for our benefit. The murder, the theft, the key, they are all pieces of theater. But the stage manager has forgotten one crucial detail. The psychology of the true criminal is not the psychology of a panicked, indebted nephew. The real criminal is cool, methodical, and thinks of everything, except for the small illogical realities they cannot control. He placed the key gently on the desk. This key is a lie, Inspector, and lies, in a case such as this, are often more revealing than the truth. Poirot's method shifted. The direct questioning had yielded its crop of facts and lies. Now, he engaged in a more subtle warfare, the deployment of the pointed, seemingly casual remark. He became a gardener, planting seeds of anxiety to see which would sprout into telltale weeds of guilt. He found Lydia Van Allen arranging chrysanthemums in the conservatory. The artistry, it is impeccable, madam, he remarked. One must have a steady hand, a clear vision of the final design, like the staging of a drama. N'est-ce pas? Every prop must be in its place, the key, the paperweight, the stopped clock. A pity when a single discordant element intrudes, a fresh wood shaving, for instance. It speaks of the workshop, of practical hands, not of the drawing room. Her hands, so steady on the stems, did not tremble, but she snapped a thorny stem with unnecessary force. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. My hands are only for flowers, and for writing letters, he said softly, and left her. He encountered Dr. Croft on the terrace. attempting to read a medical journal. "The psychology of time, it fascinates me, Doctor," Poirot began, seating himself unbidden. "A man is killed. A clock is stopped, deliberately, one assumes, to mark the moment. Yet, if the clock was already stopped, say at 10:08, but the man died later, what then? It would create an illusion, a false timing. Only a medical man, perhaps, could make a more precise estimate of death that would contradict the theatrical clock. Such a man would be very useful to a criminal." Croft's face grew still. "Are you suggesting I would falsify a time of death?" "I suggest nothing. I merely muse on the usefulness of certain professions. Tell me, as a man of science, could a heavy cabinet be moved silently? Practically impossible. But if it were already moved? If the murder occurred in an already empty space? Then the silence is explained. Oui? The doctor's knuckles were white on his journal. That is a preposterous theory. Is it?" Poirot's eyes were innocent. "It is only the little grey cells amusing themselves." He sought out Neville Stanton, who was brooding in the billiard room. "You are a student of human nature, Monsieur Stanton. I perceive you are. You play a role, the discontented heir. It is a good disguise, for it makes one a suspect of convenience. The key planted in the stables, it points to you so obviously it becomes an insult to the intelligence. It says, 'Here is the guilty one, look no further.' That, I think, is the true crime against you." Neville stared, the cynical mask slipping into genuine confusion. "You think I'm being framed? I think someone believes you are the perfect canvas on which to paint their guilt. But the frame, it does not fit the picture. Your motive is crude, financial. The mind behind this is refined. It deals in secrets, not debts." Finally, Poirot wandered into the library, where Miss Vance was meticulously noting the gaps on the shelves. "You seek order amidst chaos, mademoiselle. I sympathize. The missing book on cabinetry, it is a clue. But to what? Not to the theft, I think. To the method. One would consult it not to steal a cabinet, but to understand how to open it, to appreciate it, or to replicate it." Her head jerked up. Replicate? A wild fancy, perhaps. But if the cabinet could not be moved silently, and yet it is gone, one must consider all possibilities, even the impossible. He paused. "You admired Finch's precision. Yet his precision failed him last night. His clock was unwound. His desk was in disarray. For such a man, is that not a kind of screaming anomaly?" "It is," she whispered. "Precisement," said Poirot. "It is the scream I have been listening for." That evening at dinner, a tense, quiet affair, Poirot delivered his masterstroke. Over the pudding, he addressed the table airily. "I must thank you all. You have helped me to see that there were not one, but two crimes committed here last night. The first was a murder, impulsive and violent. The second was a grand illusion, planned with meticulous care. They are connected by circumstance, but not by the hand that performed them. This complicates matters greatly for the murderer, for they now share their stage with another criminal. It is a most unstable partnership. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sharp intake of breath from one person at the table. Poirot did not look to see who. He merely dabbed his moustache with a napkin, his eyes reflecting the candlelight like those of a contented cat. The seeds were planted. Now he must watch for the cracks in the soil. The crack in the soil appeared not with a whisper, but with a scream. Shortly after midnight, a terrified housemaid raised the alarm. Miss Ilara Vance was not in her room. Her bed was unslept in. More ominously, on her neatly ordered writing desk, a single sheet of paper lay weighted by a glass paperweight. The note, written in her precise scholarly hand, was brief and damning. "I can no longer live with the deception. The weight of it is unbearable. I sought only to preserve a great work of art from a crass transaction. But I have been ensnared in a terrible web. Forgive me. Do not look for me. E.V. Inspector Barlow, roused from his bed in the village, was brimming with a grim vindication. There, the second criminal, just as you said, Poirot, the art expert. She used her knowledge to steal the cabinet, probably in league with that Paris collector. Finch discovered her plan. She killed him, and now she's fled. Poirot, wrapped in a silk dressing gown and looking profoundly awake, examined the room. It was as orderly as Finch's office had been. No clothes were missing from the wardrobe. Her sturdy walking shoes remained by the door. Only her coat and a small handbag seemed absent. She flees into a frosty night without her shoes? Poirot murmured, "C'est curieux." His eyes swept the room, landing on the waste paper basket. He upended it onto a sheet of newspaper. Amongst the usual debris were several curled wood shavings. Oak, fresh, identical to the one he had found in the library. Also a small discarded sketch on drafting paper, a detailed drawing of an intricate geometric pattern, ivory inlay against ebony. The design from the cabinet's door, Poirot stated. She was studying it, yes, but to steal it, or to understand it? Barlow was not listening. He brandished the note. Her confession. Is it? Poirot took the paper, holding it close to the lamp. He examined the pen strokes, the pressure, the spacing. It speaks of a web. It claims a motive of preservation. This is not the confession of a murderer, Inspector. It is the lament of a witness. A witness who saw something, who knew something, and who has now, perhaps, been silenced. The word hung in the cold air. Silenced? You think someone has taken her? I think this note is a performance like the oily key. It is meant to direct us, to close the case. Do not look for me. Poirot's eyes were flinty. That, I am afraid, is an invitation Hercule Poirot cannot accept. He moved to the window. It was unlocked. A faint scuff, recent, marred the sill. Below, a narrow flower bed was trampled. She left this way, or was taken this way, in haste and against her will. He turned back to the room, his gaze falling on the small bookcase. A gap caught his eye. He crossed to it and read the titles aloud. The Silent World, A History of Locks, Veneers and Their Application. He pointed to the empty space. And here, the missing volume is Structural Joinery of the Renaissance, said Sir Robert hoarsely from the doorway. I lent it to her last week. She said she was fascinated by the cabinet's construction. Poirot felt a familiar electric tingle of comprehension. The wood shavings, the borrowed book on joinery, the detailed sketch, the silent removal of an immense object. Inspector, he said, his voice low with urgency. We have been fools. We have been searching for a stolen cabinet. We have been searching for a missing woman. We must now ask ourselves, what if the cabinet was never meant to be moved? What if the illusion was not its disappearance, but the fact of its theft? What on earth do you mean? Barlow spluttered. I mean, said Poirot, that we have been examining a magic trick and staring at the empty box, not at the magician's hands. Miss Vance was not studying the cabinet to steal it. She was studying it to authenticate it, and someone feared what she might have discovered. He clasped his hands behind his back. The clock that stopped at 10:08. We have focused on the time. But we have not asked the essential question. Why stop a clock at all? He looked at each bewildered face in turn. I will tell you why. Because it is the only way to make sure everyone synchronizes their stories to a moment that never truly happened. While Inspector Barlow organized a search of the grounds for Miss Vance, Poirot returned to the heart of the mystery, the library. He requested that Sir Robert and a nervous footman bring a powerful electric lamp. In the harsh, unforgiving light, the room was transformed. Every fibre of the rug, every mote of dust, became a potential witness. He ignored the desk for now. Instead, he went to the empty space on the Persian rug. On his hands and knees, he examined the depressed area where the cabinet's great weight had rested for decades. "The impression is uniform, deep," he muttered. "It did not rock or shift recently. It sat squarely." His eyes then traced the faint, almost imperceptible drag marks in the pile leading from the depression toward the French windows. They were shallow, as if made by something with a broad, smooth base being shifted a bare inch or two, not dragged clear across the room. He followed this phantom trail not to the windows, but to the bookshelf with the misshelved book. He removed the volumes on either side of the gap. Running his fingers along the empty shelf, he gave a soft exclamation. There, at the back, was a single tiny sliver of pale wood, oak, not the dark ebony of the missing masterpiece. "The structural joinery," he whispered. He stood, his mind racing. The wood shavings in Miss Vance's room, the borrowed book, the sketch of the inlay pattern. They were not the tools of a thief, but of a restorer. Or a forger. He moved to the desk. He did not touch the stopped clock, but he studied it as if it were a suspect. He noted the position of the hands, 10:08. He noted the keyhole for winding. With a magnifying glass from his pocket, he peered at it. His breath caught. There was a minute, fresh scratch on the brass surround, a tiny, violent marring of the patina. "Voile," he breathed. He summoned the footman. "The clock on the desk, when it was working. Did it chime?" "No, sir. It's a silent carriage clock." "And to wind it?" "The key?" "It's usually kept in the central drawer, sir." Poirot opened the drawer. Among the orderly items lay a small brass key. He picked it up with his tweezers. It was clean. Too clean. He held it to his nose. The faintest scent of metal polish, not of fingerprint oil or the natural patina of daily use. "It has been recently cleaned," he stated. He inserted it into the clock's winding arbor. It turned with a soft, grinding click. Then another, and another. "The spring," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "It is fully wound. It has not run down from last night. It has been manually stopped." The pieces clicked into place in his mind with an almost audible snap. The stopped clock was not a marker of time, but a metronome setting a false rhythm for the entire investigation. If the clock was manually stopped at 10:08, then the murder could have occurred at any time after Finch wound it as part of his evening routine. The doctor's estimated window of death between 10 and 11 was useless, dictated by the very evidence designed to mislead him. Poirot now saw the sequence not as it was presented, but as it must have been. The cabinet, he said aloud to the empty room, it was the centerpiece. Its removal was the great spectacle. But what if the spectacle was a disguise? You draw all eyes to the gaping hole, so that no one thinks to question the nature of what filled it. He thought of the fresh oak, the book on joinery. What if the ebony cabinet that stood here yesterday was not the true ebony cabinet at all? What if it was a replica? A brilliant, temporary fake. The hidden clue was not one object, but a constellation of contradictions. The fresh oak, the stopped and wound clock, the too convenient key, the missing book on construction. They all pointed away from a simple theft and toward an elaborate fraud that had turned deadly. Miss Vance had discovered it. She had the knowledge to authenticate the cabinet. She must have confronted the forger. And now she was gone. Poirot stood, his face grim. He knew the how of the illusion. Now he must discern the who, and more urgently, find Miss Vance before the final deadly act of the play commenced. The criminal had staged a disappearance once. They would not hesitate to make a second disappearance permanent. Poirot did not call for a search party. Instead, he requested that Inspector Barlow gather everyone, Sir Robert, Lydia, Neville, and Dr. Croft, in the drawing room at once. His manner was not that of a man conducting a frantic hunt, but of a curator preparing to present a finished exhibition. "The search for Miss Vance continues, Monsieur Poirot," Barlow said, flustered. "Should we not?" "All in good time, Inspector. First, we must understand what she knew. And for that, we must understand what truly happened in the library. Please, indulge me." When they were assembled, the air thick with tension and exhaustion, Poirot stood before the fireplace. He was the picture of calm precision. "We begin," he said with a correction. "We have spoken of 2 crimes, a murder and a theft. This is incorrect. There were 3. The murder of Alistair Finch, the fraud of the Ebony cabinet, and the abduction of Miss Vance." A ripple of shock went through the room. "Abduction?" Sir Robert gasped. The note was a forgery, a clumsy attempt to mimic her hand under duress. She did not flee. She was taken because she alone, with her expert eye, had deduced the truth of the fraud. He paused, letting the word fraud settle. The ebony cabinet that stood in the library yesterday was a replica. A brilliant, temporary copy, constructed perhaps in the seclusion of the old stables. The fresh oak shavings, the borrowed book on joinery, Miss Vance's own sketch, they are the traces of its creation. The real cabinet, the priceless antique, was removed from this house days, even weeks ago, under some perfectly ordinary pretext, for cleaning, for insurance assessment. Its stand-in took its place. Lydia Van Allen's hand flew to her throat. Neville stared, open-mouthed. Dr. Croft adjusted his spectacles, his face impassive. "But why?" demanded Barlow. "And how does Finch fit in?" "Finch was the linchpin," Poirot said. "He oversaw the household. He had the trust. He could facilitate the switch. But he was also a blackmailer. He knew everyone's secrets. He would have known of the replica, and he would have demanded a share of the profits from its eventual theatrical theft. Last night, he was to meet his accomplice, not Sir Robert, to finalize terms. But the accomplice had a different finale in mind. He turned to the clock on the mantelpiece. Time. It is the murderer's greatest ally, or their betrayer. The clock on the desk was stopped at 10:08 to create an immutable point around which all alibis would crystallize. But it was a lie. Finch wound that clock every night as ritual. The key to it was recently cleaned. The clock was manually stopped, then set to the incriminating time. The murder did not occur at 10:08. It occurred later, when the house was quieter. The stopped clock and the later, real time of death allowed the murderer to be, seemingly, in two places at once. Poirot's gaze swept the room. The replica cabinet, being lighter and perhaps differently constructed, could be moved quickly by one person with a dolly. It was removed after the murder, through the French windows, which had been left unoiled and noisy to convince us they had not been used. The sound was irrelevant by then. The only witness in the hall was gone. The theft was the grand finale, designed to mask the prior, completed fraud, and to provide a motive that would point to an outside thief or a greedy nephew. He focused on Neville. The key in the stables, oiled for silent use but lacking any trace of sawdust or dirt from moving furniture, was meant to condemn you. It was a prop. Finally, Poirot turned his eyes to Dr. Croft. "And the time of death, Doctor? Your estimation, between 10 and 11, was not based on the body, but on the clock, was it not? You are not a fool. You knew the clock had been tampered with. You confirmed its false time with your medical authority, knowing it would give you an alibi for the true later moment of the crime. You played chess with Sir Robert until 9:45. You said you went to the study. But what if you went to the library? What if you met Finch, argued, killed him, staged the scene with the clock, and then, in the deep of the night when all slept, you removed the replica cabinet with the dolly you had prepared? Croft's face was a mask of stone. This is fantasy. Why would I, a respected doctor, involve myself in such a scheme? For the same reason you have been prescribing Sir Robert Digitalis for a weak heart he does not, in fact, have, Poirot said softly, lethally, to hasten an inheritance for a beneficiary who has promised you a share, and for the reason you could so calmly suggest a replica was preposterous, because you commissioned it. You needed the cabinet gone and its value liquidated without Sir Robert's knowledge. A fake theft of a fake cabinet after his death would have been the perfect crime. Finch and your promised beneficiary were your tools. But Finch became a threat, and Miss Vance, she became an unexpected hazard. In the deafening silence, a single, strained voice spoke from the doorway. The beneficiary was me, wasn't it, Robert? All heads turned. Lydia Van Allen stood, her elegant facade shattered into a ruin of shame and fury. She was not looking at Croft. She was staring at her husband. Sir Robert's eyes were filled with a bottomless sorrow. "Oh, my dear," he whispered. "What have you done?" All eyes swiveled from Lydia's shattered form to the old man in the wingback chair. Sir Robert Van Allen seemed to have aged a decade in moments. The sorrow in his eyes hardened into a bleak, penetrating clarity. "What have I done, Lydia?" he asked, his voice thin but steady. "I have loved you. I have indulged you. And I have, perhaps, been willfully blind." He turned his gaze to Dr. Croft. "Benedict, my oldest friend. Was it for her? Or was it for the money you have sunk into that clinic in town, the one that never seems to turn a profit?" Poirot raised a hand, restoring a fragile order. "The question of who is now plain. The question of how remains. Permit me to illuminate the final links in the chain." He addressed the room, but his words were arrows aimed at the two conspirators. The plan was indeed one of diabolical cleverness. Sir Robert's health is poor. His heart is weak. Upon his death, the magnificent, unentailed collection would pass to his wife, who, guided by the trusted Dr. Croft, would be advised to sell certain pieces to settle estate debts. The Judas miseries, through a discreet Parisian contact, would fetch a fortune. But Sir Robert is a stubborn custodian. He would never agree. So, the cabinet must be made to disappear before his death, with blame falling elsewhere. A replica, constructed in secret, would be stolen in a dramatic, baffling crime. The real diamonds would already be safe in a bank vault in Paris, the replica cabinet worthless. After Sir Robert's passing, Lydia would discover the diamonds elsewhere, a happy accident, and legally sell them. But Alistair Finch, Poirot continued, that keen observer of secrets, grew suspicious. He examined the cabinet, perhaps testing the lock Finch himself had oiled. He found the substitute. He confronted you, Dr. Croft. You became not accomplices, but his victims. He demanded a king's ransom for his silence. You agreed to a meeting last night to pay him. You suggested the library after Sir Robert's chess game, a place Finch controlled. But you brought no money. You brought violence. Croft said nothing, his jaw clenched. You struck him with the paperweight, a blow of anger, not cool calculation. Then, you applied your methodical mind. You knew the house routines. You set the clock hands to 10:08 and stopped the mechanism, knowing it would warp the time of death. You placed the duplicate key, which you had commissioned long ago for this very plot, in his pocket. You then left, locking the door, to establish your alibi in your study. Later, in the dead of night, you returned. You used the dolly waiting in the garden to move the replica cabinet, a far lighter, simpler task than moving the original, out through the French windows and to a place of disposal. The theft was complete. But, Poirot's voice sharpened, you had two unforeseen complications. First, the wood shaving, a tiny witness from the replica's construction, left on the library floor. Second, and more dangerously, Miss Elara Vance. Her expert eye had noted a slight discrepancy in the inlay pattern days before. She borrowed the book on joinery to confirm her doubts. She knew it was a fake. Last night, after the murder, she must have voiced her suspicion to you, Doctor. Or to you, Madame. She was not part of the plot, she was its greatest threat. So, you manufactured a confession, and you took her. Where is she? Lydia Van Allen let out a choked sob. The ice house, the old ice house by the kitchen garden. She's tied up, but she's alive. She glared at Croft, her voice a venomous hiss. He said we had to silence her for good. I couldn't. I wouldn't let him. Inspector Barlow, galvanized, sent two men sprinting from the room. Croft finally spoke, his professional calm a cracked veneer. A compelling fairy tale, Poirot. But proof? You have none but the hysterical accusations of a frightened woman. I have the testimony of the clock, Poirot said. The scratch from the violence stopping. I have the oiled key with no trace of dirt. I have the wood shavings linking to your workshop in the stable, Doctor, where you fancy yourself a carpenter. Most of all, I have the testimony of the real ebony cabinet. A piece of that stature does not vanish into thin air. It will be traced to your Parisian contact, and the transfer documents will bear your handwriting, or that of your intermediary. The fraud, once exposed, is a road that leads directly to your door. The drawing room door opened. A constable, his coat dusty, entered. Sir, in a hidden compartment in the doctor's motor car, we found these. He held out a leather folio. Inside were architectural drawings of the cabinet's dimensions, a receipt from a London timber merchant for oak and ebony veneer, and a handwritten note listing the precise carat weight and clarity of the 12 Judas miseries. Sir Robert took the folio, his hands trembling not with weakness but with rage. My friend, he whispered. Dr. Croft's shoulders slumped. The fight drained from him. He looked not at Sir Robert, but at Lydia, with a mixture of contempt and despair. For you, he muttered. It was always for you, and you lacked the nerve to see it through. Miss Vance was found, cold and frightened but unharmed, in the derelict ice house. The recovery of the real cabinet from a London storage warehouse and the diamonds from a Paris vault would be a matter for the international authorities. Lydia Van Allen, broken by her lover's betrayal and her own guilt, confessed to her part in the fraud, though she maintained she knew nothing of the murder until after the fact. Dr. Benedict Croft, charged with murder, fraud, and abduction, went to the gallows in a silence that spoke of neither remorse nor defiance, but of a profound, clinical failure. As Poirot prepared to depart Meadowbank House, Sir Robert saw him to the door. You have saved more than my property, Monsieur Poirot. You have saved me from a poison administered drop by drop. I saw only the symptoms in my wife, restlessness, extravagance, not the disease in my friend. I am a blind old fool. Non, Sir Robert, Poirot said, adjusting his gloves. You are a man who valued beauty and trust. The criminal mind exploits these very things. It wraps deception in the parchment of affection and hides theft behind the curtain of admiration. My little gray cells, they are useful for seeing the cracks in the veneer, but it is the heart that must decide what to build once the rotten cabinet is taken away. He gave a precise little bow and stepped into the waiting taxi. As it pulled away from the grand, grieving house, Hercule Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied sigh. The symmetry was restored. The order, so violently disrupted, was returning. And the world, though forever marred by human frailty, was once again arranged with a neatness that he, Hercule Poirot, could appreciate.